Well, thank you so much, Mr. Edel. It's a real pleasure to see you again. Greetings, everyone. Professor Van Viesen, who will be speaking on the panel as well, and Mr. Shikluna, who I hope will be coming back shortly. Colleagues and friends, just before I begin, let me also warmly welcome all the participants to this event on behalf of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. We are very pleased to co-host this important meeting together with Population Europe and the European Commission's Vice Presidency for Democracy and Demography. As you said, Mr. Edel, the focus of this event on the future of women in rural areas in the context of demographic change that we're seeing in Europe is a really exciting and extremely relevant topic. And it's intimately linked to the work that we are doing as UNFPA to empower women and expand the choices they have, and to support countries in strengthening their demographic resilience. I focused my intervention around several questions, Mr. Edel. I'm not sure if you will be asking us questions later, but perhaps I can just dive into some of the key issues that I think we need to raise during this panel debate, if that's okay with you.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, good. So I think on the issue of the types of policy choices that we need to see when it comes to creating more gender equal societies, which is what we really want to see in rural areas. I think there's a broad consensus on what needs to be part of that policy package, the quality, affordable childcare starting from an early age, flexible and generously paid parental leave for both parents with incentives for men to take what they're entitled to, which sometimes they don't for various reasons. Flexible work arrangements and providing equal pay for women. Programs to encourage men and women to equally share care and household work. And I think that we have seen a lot of progress in our region in this area. However, women in rural areas don't always benefit from that progress. And this has a huge impact on them throughout the life course. In thinking about what should be improved when we're looking at the gender dynamics in rural and underserved communities, I think that women in rural areas, especially the poor and marginalized, are often those who have the least autonomy when it comes to exercising their reproductive rights, and the least access to services. In conservative rural areas, which we still have in our region, women often have to rely on their husbands or relatives to give them permission to go for prenatal care or to seek family planning services. And rural women and girls are also vulnerable to some forms of gender-based violence. A recent study that we undertook with the OSCE in Eastern and Southeastern Europe found that rural women experience much higher levels of intimate partner violence. And harmful practices like child marriage, bride kidnapping, and elder abuse continue in the region. So that's why a lot of our support as UNFPA, in line with the principles of the International Conference on Population and Development, is focused on enhancing rights and choices, ensuring access to sexual and reproductive health, promoting gender equality and social inclusion of marginalized groups, developing gender-responsive family policies, enabling young people to succeed, and protecting the rights and tapping into the skills of older persons. One example of the type of work that we do to collect the data and evidence to develop effective policies is the Gender and Generation Survey, supported in many countries, most recently in Belarus and Moldova. This is a great tool to understand the dynamics at play and to inform policies. We're working with government, civil society, and the private sector to try to make work environments more family-friendly. And another example of the type of work we do is a very exciting new program launched earlier this year with support of the Austrian Development Agency called Expanding Choices. And we work with the private sector, with governments to champion gender-responsive family policies to help shift discriminatory gender norms and redistribute unpaid care work so that both men and women can realize their career aspirations and their fertility intentions. Perhaps I'll stop here, Mr. Edel, just in terms of the types of policy work that we're doing in the region. And then I'm happy to speak later much more specifically on some of the other issues, including the impact of COVID-19 on rural women. Thank you, and back to you.
Thank you for these first insights. I see now that the head of the cabinet is online. Let's see whether we get a connection. Mr.
Yes, I should be back. I don't know if you can hear me. I can hear you now.
Yes, works perfectly well. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Very good. Thank you, and my apologies for the mishap earlier, which means that unfortunately I missed part of the introduction, but I managed to hear the last part of the previous intervention, and many of the things that were mentioned there are in fact things that are very much at the forefront of our thinking in the European Commission on rural areas, but also in particular the aspect of looking at the particular situation faced by women in rural areas. The context of this is a long-term vision that we are working on rural areas, and sometimes we have to explain what we mean by a long-term vision. It's not something that we're just sitting around and thinking, what do we, you know, what's going to happen in 40 or 50 years time. What we're doing actually is coming up with something that is very concrete, very actionable, and which will in fact start being implemented immediately, and hopefully will continue to be implemented with a view to improving the situation of rural areas in the longer term. Now, where does the sort of the gender element, where does the women angle come into it? Well, I think we can all agree that there are still, while certain situations have improved. I mean, we are in a situation where the president of the European Commission is a woman, the head of the European Central Bank is a woman, the first vice president of the European Parliament is a woman, the chancellor leading the Council of the European Union is a woman. But unfortunately, that doesn't mean that many of the structural obstacles that women have disappeared altogether. They have not. They simply have not. And this applies across the board, but I think very specifically so in rural areas. And this will be an angle that we will be looking at very closely as we develop this long-term vision. We've just concluded the consultation part of it, and we've had a very high number of contributions in this consultation, including ones which address this aspect. And we will be taking these into account as we start to develop this vision. And it's very clear that if we look at what are the specific challenges that rural areas face, then we see that at the forefront, we will have women who are suffering, to use the term, disproportionately in facing these challenges. If we have rural areas that are facing depopulation, very often the ones who are left behind and who have to deal with the consequences of depopulation, very often it's women. If we look at agriculture, which is a very important part of our rural areas, we see that women still are not given the same opportunities in terms of management, in terms of even of ownership in some parts of Europe. That they should be given, and that they should have rather than given. It's not a question of anybody giving it. It's a question of having a truly level playing field, which allows access to everyone equally, irrespective of gender. But I think in the case of women, there's a lot of lost ground that has to be made up. We see that, as with the broader population, educated women in rural areas tend to look for opportunities elsewhere, but still in smaller numbers than their male peers, which means that this brings with it a degree of frustration, of lack of opportunity, of lack of unrealized potential. And these are all aspects that we would like to address in this long-term vision, which we were thinking of in terms of a pact with rural areas, if you like. We really want to unleash the potential of rural areas, going beyond agriculture, but at the same time protecting and maintaining the essential character of rural areas, but looking at how we can make them better connected, how we can make them more attractive to across the board. So this by way of a general introduction, and I'll be happy to come in on specific points later on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Skiguluna, that you gave us also a good insight into the political planning and the political ideas about that. Now, I would invite Leo van Wissen to take the floor to also give a little science perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Andreas. Well, thanks for this invitation to this very interesting and necessary, important meeting. I'm not a specialist in gender studies. My experience is much more in regional demographic change and population decline in rural regions. So the question of the role of women in this regard is a challenging one for me, but I'm happy to sort of embark on that and think with you about it. So what is the gender dimension in the demography of rural regions? Well, first, young women, more than men at the same age, are inclined to leave rural regions for study or work in the urban regions. The majority of university students today is female, and there's sort of a deficit of young females in the rural regions. That also means that those who are staying in the region are on average a little less than high educated. Second, rural regions are on average older regions, and the gender balance changes to females for the older population in these regions. Health and care, both formal and informal, become then important issues. And sort of the innovations needed for society to look at aging are primarily and foremost in rural regions, which makes it the more difficult sometimes. But third, we are talking about people or women leaving the region, but migration is not one directional. Return migration exists, but this is mainly for social reasons. Research shows that it occurs much more frequently if parents are still living in the region. So there's a strong gender dimension in intergenerational caregiving, and this is related to this type of moves as well. But since the COVID pandemics, potentially a new development may arise because we have discovered working from home and the risks of living in densely populated areas. And this may inspire some households to seek the green pastures of the countryside, and but it may only be possible for the more wealthy among us who are able to work from home. But in the longer run, this is a scenario that is not quite impossible, and it might result in new opportunities for the countryside. But in the past, as we've seen, a move from urban centers to the suburbs or the countryside had negative consequences for the labor market position of female partners. But we may hope that today this will be a little different when women are becoming higher educated than men. But what is needed for a region to become attractive excuse me, for such moves is being well connected to the economic core area. And Colin already mentioned the notion of connectivity. Many rural regions are looking for ways to revitalize the region by looking for potential for economic growth and return even to population growth. But the truth is that this may be impossible for many of these regions. Even at a national level, we have to prepare for population decline if that is not already reality. And growth is mainly concentrated in the central regions of countries. So economic growth should not be the goal of policies for these regions. But what else? I think the core is well-being. Well-being is a much broader concept than economic prosperity. Resilience of rural communities is a much more important factor to result in that. That's a very broad concept that involves healthcare, social services, leisure, community activities, and so on. The role of women in these developments is very crucial. The role of local governments is to provide the conditions and to facilitate such developments, which is different from the past, where traditionally they had sort of more a role of top-down, devising solutions and implementing them. This should be much more sort of a bottom-up development. And empowering people to do that, and especially women, is very important in that. Not only local and regional governments are important, the economy, of course, is a very important aspect as well. And I think two economic sectors may contribute to such developments, the health sector and tourism. And tourism is, of course, only possible for the most attractive regions for that. Again, in these sectors, a strong role for women is very well possible. I would conclude by saying that we should move away from the, I could call that the very masculine idea of economic growth and employment and so on, and move to the much more feminine and inclusive dimension of well-being to result in a much more vital urban countryside, of rural countryside for the future. Happy to talk with you about that later on. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Leo, also for you, to you for this first statement to make the point also from the science perspective. I will now would like to start the discussion with a question on gender roles. It's already well known that the gender roles are influenced by cultural and societal norms. The policy choices play an important part in creating more or less gender equal societies. A very simple example is the division of everyday household tasks. There's plenty of evidence showing that fathers on average still do much less of unpaid work than mothers do. But more and more studies are looking into the role of paternity leave, which indicates that when father use this benefit, the division of household tasks seems to become a bit more balanced usually. We also know that this gender inequality prevails in the labor market, and your three interventions already touched this point very strongly. Women tend, of course, to earn much less than men who have the same positions, and are far overrepresented in care occupations, which is now very visible during the pandemic. In your perspective, what would be the key aspects that should be improved when looking at the gender dynamics in rural and underserved communities, and how can policies better support women and help create more inclusive societies? Let me pose this question first to the three panelists. Who wants to take the floor first? Please simply unmute yourself. Colin, would you like to say something?
Sure, I could come in. I think one very important aspect is linked to empowerment and linked to policy decision making at all levels. I think that it's very important that these are issues which are very much at the forefront of local leaders and local leadership, to be able to design a comprehensive approach to all the issues, because as I mentioned before, this is not necessarily about one identifiable concern. Some of them are easily identifiable. You mentioned, for example, the fact that women are disproportionately represented in the care sector, that women still earn less than men for the same jobs. These are identifiable, and there are measures which can be put into place to address them. But I think the more difficult challenges are linked to changing mentalities, to changing stereotypes, which still prevail. And unfortunately, I think, even if I'm not a scientist in this field, I think I can say that in rural areas, there is a tendency to be more conservative and to be less open to a different approach. And I think that we need to try to change the narrative in a sense. It has to do a lot with how we communicate and how we put these issues at the forefront of our policy making. And that's why, for example, with our long-term vision, adding a gender dimension was not necessarily an automatic choice, but it's something that we arrived at because we thought we need to give prominence to these issues. And if we don't give prominence, then people aren't going to change the way that they think. So I would point to those two aspects in particular: decision-making at the local level, and the changing of the narrative and the changing of mentalities, which is linked to education, of course, as well.
Elena or Leo, do you want to directly?
Sure, Andreas. I will continue just building on what Mr. Scicluna has just said. Fully agree. Empowerment and changing the narrative are key. I think also, of course, that information and service availability is key for empowerment and improving the quality of life of women in rural areas, but absolutely agree that more attention needs to be paid to the structural barriers and the discriminatory social norms that constrain women's decision-making power and participation in rural households and communities. And we see that, you know, in many places of the region, that restrictive social norms and gender stereotypes limit rural women's ability to access health services or even the critical technologies they need to improve their work and personal life. So I, as UNFPA, tend to speak more about the programs that we're actually running, because I think that's what we can offer to this conversation. We've set up a number of programs to help combat these traditional gender roles and promote a more positive social norms in the area of gender equality. We have a Men Engage program, for example, that promotes stronger engagement of men at home when it comes to household work and care of children or older family members. We have a large-scale EU-funded program, which we deliver together with UN Women, which is called Together Against Gender Stereotypes. And it seeks to strengthen equal rights and opportunities for women and men by shifting social perceptions around gender roles and tackling gender stereotypes. In countries like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Turkey, we're working with male influencers and celebrities to help shift these cultural norms and encourage men to take more active roles in household work and childcare. We also work with a variety of partners to support empowerment programs for rural women in particular. For example, in Georgia, we've joined hands with the Liberty Bank and the FAO to initiate a series of joint meetings in rural areas to increase awareness and empower rural women. At the same time, in Georgia, we work on changing social norms, supporting fatherhood campaigns, working with rural men on issues of violence against women. I don't want to take up too much time. I have quite a few more examples, but I also have colleagues here that are UNFPA representatives or UNFPA staff from a number of our countries in the region, and they may themselves have good examples of how UNFPA together with partners is working towards shifting those social norms that really hold back the empowerment of women, particularly in rural areas. So I'll stop there for now. Thank you, Andreas.
Mm-hmm. Leo, would you like to say something on that?
Yes, for sure. Well, I completely agree that the structural barriers to changes are very severe, maybe the most important ones. And we see indeed in society a sort of a divide more and more appearing, maybe also internationally to some extent, of developments towards more equal rights for both males and females. And traditional roles, which goes together with sort of an urban-rural divide, which is sort of a little generalization, but still it exists. I think that can only be overcome by more connectivity between the two. They should not stand opposite to each other. I see a lot of developments in more the policies of today, or political field, as sort of a reaction to what happens in the more advanced areas of society. By more connections in terms of internet, other infrastructure, the two worlds could become more together, and that would, I guess, help to create some more understanding and maybe also more innovations in terms of social roles and so on in the rural areas. So that is, I think, a very crucial element of what governments and policies should and could do. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This morning, when we had the first meeting with experts, there was one point which was raised by colleagues, which is we have a great diversity actually, and you touched it already in some of your contributions. So you have regions where you have we are really depopulating. Il y a des régions they do much better sometimes in the job market. So Europe is extremely diverse as well as its regions. And secondly, there's a diversity in terms of the life courses, which look different in these regions. So what I would like to ask you is, how can we deal with that with a European perspective? So what is actually the possibility to overcome this kind of diversities in Europe and to create a policy which more or less starts from a, let's say, common denominator? And what would that denominator potentially be? Colin, would you like to say something on that?
Yes, it's true that there is a great diversity across Europe, but in reality, when we look closer, we find that there's far more similarity than one would think, because even, we tend to think, for example, of depopulation as being an issue that's only facing the poorer countries within Europe. But the reality is that even the wealthier ones have issues which are linked to depopulation. A country like the Netherlands, ironically enough, which is densely populated, but in parts of the Netherlands, there are issues which are linked to depopulation and which need to be addressed. So there are lessons that can be learned and can be shared across the board. If you look at Spain, for example, I think one of the classic examples where, if you look at the demographic map of Spain, you see that the population is around the coast primarily, and then you have Madrid more or less in the middle, and the rest is very empty or emptying. This is certainly one of the better off countries in Europe. So it's not just the Eastern Europeans and the newer member states that are facing these issues. Secondly, I think that it's true that many of these issues are not necessarily a European competence, or there is a shared competence. But one of the things that we've been pleasantly surprised in dealing with what is a new portfolio at the European level, democracy and demography, is something that has never been tackled at within the Commission in this way before. So we're building something from the ground up. At first, we thought that we had to tread very carefully because member states would be very territorial about the fact that they have the competence here primarily. But in fact, the reverse has been the case. And in most cases, they've really been very keen to examine, to explore what can be done at European level. There have been things that have been asked of the Commission to be done at European level. We've had the first ever Council conclusions on demography adopted in June this year. So we see that there is a desire to look for solutions at a European level. We think that there are a number of things that can be done. It will take time. These are not solutions that are going to be, magic wand and things will change from one day to the next. Because many of these issues are local issues. So it's not even at the national level that we need to address them. Some things will need to be addressed at the national level. But we need to go to all regions, to all levels, of decision making, the European, the national, the regional, the local, to have a really comprehensive set of solutions which can be applicable. None of them are going to be applicable to all. What we want to do is to offer a range, to offer a palette of solutions, and then different areas will choose the ones that best apply to them. Thanks.
Yeah, Alana, would you like to say something from the international perspective on that?
Sure, thank you, Andres. Well, I think, again, building on Mr. Scicluna, I think it's wonderful to see what's happening across Europe right now is the seriousness with which we take the issue of demography. I think that in a way it's back on the agenda. It was missing for a few years, and now we really see that countries concerned about their demographic challenges, of course, are really looking at the impact of population dynamics and sustainable development. And I think that's a very good thing. So, of course, as has been said, there's a huge variety in that sense of what we're seeing across the region. And we do know that the demographic issues faced by the countries, whether population decline, rural depopulation, or rural demographic revitalization, can't be solved, unfortunately, with any blanket quick fix approach, although we wish that we had those solutions. And they do require comprehensive population and social policies really aimed at unleashing the potential of human capital, as the professor said, focusing on well-being, grounded in the principles of gender equality. Again, another example of work that we're doing in Serbia, for example, UNFPA and UNDP have joined forces to organize a depopulation lab. And the lab has brought together experts and policymakers from within and outside the country to develop responses to depopulation, including rural depopulation. So we have a portfolio of actions which support communities in the creation of family-friendly environments, age-friendly environments, but it also entails support to communities in the management of local liabilities and assets. So efforts to minimize liabilities such as dilapidated real estate and to maximize assets like recreational spaces. These are all important for local communities to potentially raise funds and ensure the necessary investment. So completely agree that we need a very localized approach. In UNFPA, we're asking ourselves right now about what it means to be a demographically resilient community, and how can we actually support communities and municipalities to promote those policies needed to really be resilient in that sense. Back to you, Andreas.
Thanks. Leo, would you like to answer to that question?
Yes, for sure. Indeed, there are so many, I mean, the different, the variety of Europe is a great asset, and we should use it somehow to get to good solutions. And indeed, I've myself worked in the north of the Netherlands and also in contact with local communities and policymakers. But if you look for best practices in other regions, you learn a lot of that. And it turns out that even within one region, the situation may be very different across different communities. Even in declining regions, you have smaller cities which grow. So there is no one size fits all approach. It means it should come from, indeed, there should be some bottom-up approach being supported or facilitated by the right level of government. And that could go up to the European level for the common problems that we all face in Europe, because we have a common demographic future ahead of us. So it means at that level, I think Europe is extremely important to make this possible. And of course, we have the vast structural funds of the European Union that are now used, well, for one part, which is very, indeed, rural agriculture. That is reorienting itself, but that, I think there's a long way to go to make this possible and give this a broader perspective than we have done so far. But I think it also means a change for policymakers who are sort of used to thinking for solutions and then implementing them in the region. Whereas, and I see it, for instance, in the north of the Netherlands now, people themselves, communities can be very strong in deciding themselves what to do, and they need the government to make this possible. And that sometimes sort of interferes with the idea of governments that the local community is a passive group of people that is not necessary or something like that. So it also needs a reorientation of policymakers, I think, at the local and regional level, and I guess also at the national level. And in finalizing that, I would say that it should also be possible that regions find their own solutions, and that sometimes national laws are in the way of implementing that, because so you should have much more sort of experimentation also in regional solutions to see if it works. And if it works, then adjust your legal and formal system to make that structural. That is something also, I guess, very important to make, well, see that the great variety in regions is also sort of mirrored in the variety of possibilities at policy level.
Yeah, thank you very much for this insight from the research perspective. I would now like to open the floor to the experts who already met today, as I mentioned, in the morning, to discuss the questions. And I would like to ask you to either use the blue hand, but better you should send a short message if you would like to take the floor. So Jelena, the first floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for a very interesting debate. And as a politician, I will talk from my point of view that I think is very important. In the last panel, we were discussing that how does the societies looks like, how does the norms looks like, and everything. And since men has been in the power forever, and women have not been so included in developing our societies and companies, and that's affecting norms and pictures and so we have to start talking about how we get women in participating in politics. And it's very hard because we are getting women to start in politics, but they doesn't stay in politics because they are exposed for so many different things, everything from sexism to blame and shame. I have been in the Balkans too, and I met women in rural areas that were entering into politics, and if they had children, they would be blamed and shamed for not being with their children. And women that didn't have children, they were blamed for not having a family. They should be having a family instead of being in politics. And then there will be even in media like, oh, she's probably lesbian or whatever, like that has anything to do with female participation. So where do we go? Well, there is a way in saying in the Balkans also that money drills where the drill doesn't go. So when we talk about funded programs, we should also be better in demanding that women are participating, how these programs are going to look like, and that they are participants in how this is developed. So female participation maybe sometimes starts in politics, but if it doesn't, we have a crucial role to play because we are the one giving away the money and expecting results. We're not going to get them if we are not much tougher in saying, okay, we want to invest this in your region or in, but we are demanding that 50% of the participants should be women in developing and implementing these programs. Otherwise, you can't apply. Sorry. That's going to give women a taste and also change the norms. Are they important or not? Because if we say they are important, but then we act as we always did, that the men are distributing the money, the men are often more corrupt than women. We know that. And we have to think and rethink. And I think we should also be much tougher. And where women are involved in politics at local, regional level, we can also see big differences in healthcare, in entrepreneurships, and so on. And I'm from Sweden, and I'm as a woman, I'm happy to live in Sweden, a woman-friendly country. But we have also this problem about rural areas where women educate themselves and then leave, and who is left? Then it's the same thing in many other countries, that we see that when women leave and the men are there, they import wives from poorer countries. So in Sweden, they would find wives in the poorer areas from Russia or Ukraine or whatever. But on the other side, I heard that in Serbia or in Poland, they have the same problem, but they would find women in Romania or Moldavia that are even poorer than them. So we see a movement of poor women moving to other countries for this. So some things are very similar and some things are not. But I think that we have to change. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think your point to really also think about this level of participation and also for females in decision-making processes was already touched this morning in our meeting. I would suggest that we first collect a few responses, a few questions, and also comments from the colleagues, and then I would play them back to the panel. The next one is Anne Goujon. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Andreas. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm talking from the European Commission Joint Research Center in ISPRA, and we embarked this year on looking at territorial aging, the process of territorial aging, which is very high on the agenda of the European Commission. And that my point would reinforce what Colin was saying about territorial aspect of aging, and that the one-size-fits-all is not going to work, especially in this area where we are looking at, so like these gender aspects of in rural and underserved communities. What we found out when we looked at territories, at a very small level, is that there are some regions, many European regions, who are actually have a weakness to attract or retain female cohorts compared to male cohorts. So this is already visible even at the regional level, even at the NUTS3 level. So there is a need to look into these specific regions, and I don't know at which level it will be due, at the local level, at the municipal level, or a regional level, but there is definitely a need for territorial policies. Thank you, that's what I wanted to say.
Sorry. Thank you for this intervention. And the next is Annemie Drieskens, the president of COFACE.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you for offering us the possibility to come in this very important debate and just present COFACE Families Europe. We represent families all over Europe, 60 organizations, and we represent millions of families. And we stand up for the diversity of those families. We fight for strong European social policies, and especially for the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. And all families, without discrimination, in our view, they need resources. So they need adequate employment, decent income. They need adequate quality services, especially in the field of care, childcare, elderly care, long-term care. And they also need time. They need time to take their responsibility at work and at home. And it was already mentioned by Ms. Armitage that the adequately paid leaves are very important, family leaves that offer women and men the possibility to take up those time for their families. And I would say we are now with COFACE really involved in the implementation of the Work-Life Balance Directive, because this offers really a good opportunity to push for adequately paid leaves that are non-transferable, so that the part that man doesn't take up is lost for the family. And also it should be embedded in a family-friendly workplace. So I would say for COFACE, the RST, that is our mantra: resources, services, and time. That's what all families need, and especially women in rural areas. I would say women in rural areas, they combine two risk factors in finding decent work. The risk of being a woman, as women participate less in the labor market, and the risk of living in a rural area, because we see that women in rural areas participate less than women in urban areas. But another point that I want to highlight is that the role of women in rural areas in the informal rural economy is really not recognized. So we should put a lens on this work. It is so important for the sustainability of the rural community. Women are the backbones of those communities, and it is often overlooked. It is not significantly recognized. And on top of that, I would say we see recently that a lot of public services are moving away from the rural areas. So there is no childcare, schools are closing, and that makes it even worse for women. I mean, they have to take over all the care, and they have a disproportionate responsibility for this unpaid work. And we as NGO, we take sometimes our organizations in Ireland, in France, in Hungary, they take over the role of those public services. So I really would like to encourage also the policymakers to support those NGOs who are helping those communities to survive. And so we should also boost the community-based services. So an investment in this, NGOs working at grassroots levels, but also recognize the care. And in these COVID times, we see that carers are essential workers. So we should really focus on carers and rural women.
Thank you.
So encourage also to close the gender care gap. That's also our ambition. It's a lot, but I'm happy to participate. And another point that I wanted to raise.
We have a lot of more people in the row. Perhaps may you just say one short point.
Yeah, the point was about those women who are obliged to leave the country. We see more or less in Eastern Europe, but they are considered as, they are called badanti. So there is a real big group of women leaving their country, moving to care for others in other European countries, and they are not recognized, they are invisible. So it's not only in India that we have house workers who are in formal care, but also in it. I'm happy to share with you all our concerns. And as family organizations and as a woman, I'm really concerned with the topic of today. So
no, let me really appreciate that you bring in also the perspective of the NGOs, because this is really also one of the aims which we always want to organize, is that really people from NGOs, from the policy sector, from research get together and we can learn from each other. So thanks a lot for your intervention. The next one who wanted to take the floor is Sebastian Klüsner from the Federal Institute for Population Research. Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Yeah, many thanks for this very exciting discussion about these important topics. I was already part in the meeting that happened before, and there I also stressed that basically it certainly needs a combination of giving more economic power to women, because without this economic power, without the income, they don't get to have a say in these rural areas. And at the same time, it needs this kind of cultural change. And there, I mean, the issue of resilience and diversity has already been stressed. And I think there's a big link between these two, right? As many companies over the last decades have become aware that in order to be resilient, they have to be more diverse, right? They need diversity management. And we also know that cities are very resilient to shocks simply because they're very diverse. They're always kind of economic sectors in the city that can come up when another sector collapses. While rural areas are often focused on one or two activities. So if pig prices go down and this is a pig going area, then basically these areas are in troubles. And it would, in order to raise awareness about why diversity and why gender empowerment is so important, would be to say that makes you more resilient if you let all generations in, all genders, like male and woman, having a say, in order then to have a more diverse economy, society that allows you to be more resilient to shocks if they occur. The only problem is that the concept of diversity is something that is a bit alien to rural areas, right? I mean, their self-identity is often by not being diverse, right? We are among us, right? In contrast to the cities. And that makes it so difficult to bring this kind of concept of diversity to these areas, although they would benefit in the long run from being much more diverse.
Thanks a lot for this further clarification, also of the concept of resilience and diversity. The next one is Jaime Nadal.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for organizing this really, truly important discussion. I'm the UNFPA representative in Ukraine, and something that we are experiencing on the ground. We can see that the state has a serious difficulty in terms of translating national policies and programs into something that is meaningful at the local level, and particularly in rural areas. And as a result of that, rural women, but rural population, at large, they feel like, I would say, almost second-class citizens, or citizens that are not really covered by the presence of the state in a meaningful way. Part of the work that we are doing in those rural areas has to do precisely with taking services to them. We have organized a network of psychosocial support teams that visit isolated communities in rural settlements, and they either provide services for the population or refer the population to the services that they can receive in nearby urban areas. But also something that we are observing, and that, it's not reflected necessarily in statistics from the perspectives of sexual and reproductive health in particular. As women age, we see that there are more and more serious health conditions that are affecting those women in rural areas. And point in case here is the incidence of uterine prolapse that is far more common among rural women because of the hardship involved in the living conditions in those rural areas. And they are, on the one hand, more exposed to those conditions, and on the other hand, less likely to access good quality services that are accessible in the cities. And that is a big, big factor in terms of the lack of well-being, access to well-being options for those women in those rural areas. I just wanted to say that because, yes, economic opportunities are important, but the state also needs to be present in those rural areas with meaningful programs and policies. And that is not necessarily the case. The lack of capacity also in rural communities is higher than in urban communities. We don't see cadres of public servants as well trained as we see in urban cities that can actually implement effectively those policies. So capacity building in rural areas is something that is also important. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Before I give the panelists the chance to respond also to some of the points, I mean, it's of course clear that this topic is so large and also so diverse in itself that we cannot in 90 minutes touch everything and all and can figure out. But I think a lot of solutions and ways to solutions are already clearly to be seen. Before I give the floor back to the panelists to give a response, I would like to pick up at least one of the questions from the experts. So I would like to ask Mr. Magaras to take the floor.
Actually, it's a comment and a couple of questions, if that's okay. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I work for the European Parliamentary Research Service and cover issues of local and regional development, also with a view on demography. And I couldn't agree more with all the panelists and the people who took the floor about rethinking what regional and local growth means, because in the past we focused so much on GDP, and we also have to think, okay, GDP growth, but for whom? Because we have seen that in many rural areas, women have been excluded from this kind of growth, superficial growth. And therefore, I think that issues of resilience, quality of life, well-being, social services, what all speakers mentioned in the past are very important. And this has been feeding into many new policies of the European Union. We currently, the European Union is Council and Parliament and the Commission, they kind of reached agreements on various EU funds which are destined to local and regional growth. And you can see quite a lot of inclusive elements as part of it. What could help as well would be gender mainstreaming in many of these policies. And I would also be interested in hearing the views of specialists on that, the experiences they had. Also, people mentioned funds destined to women entrepreneurialism or companies who also have a very mixed, broad women and men brought together. That could also be a positive kind of element. And I do hope that we'll see quite a few of these issues being part of the long-term vision for rural areas. Now, Jelena also mentioned participation of women at local and regional level, and we have done it at a glance note on that I will put at the discussion, the webinar chat. And what you can see is that participation of women at local and regional level is kind of stagnating. We have some positive elements in certain countries, but the evolution is very, very slow from year to year. So that's also something very interesting to see. And just another issue that has not been raised, the question of migrant women who are double excluded from social security system, education, participation, access to social services. This is actually something that we should be looking at. And also we shouldn't forget that we're under a pandemic that has made women more vulnerable, both in rural and urban areas, in terms of violence at their houses. They're facing more precarious conditions at work. The work that women do usually is of more precarious nature. So the impact of COVID on posts of women is very severe. They're facing more unemployment on the long term. And on the other side, on the other hand, we have also seen a very positive element of women doctors, nurses, women in social services tackling this virus. And I think this is also a kind of a positive discourse that we can develop further in order to empower women to take more active roles. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for your intervention. I would now, before I give the panelists the chance to give, if they like, an immediate response, I would like to ask also the other attendees, the other participants in this meeting, to send us, if they like, a question through the Q&A question tool so that we can also bring that forward to the panel. But now I would like to ask the three panelists if you would like to directly interact on and answer on some of the points which have been raised. Colin, would you like to take the floor?
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to react on some of the points that were made. There was a question about what the member states have asked of the Commission, and my colleague has already posted the link to show the full extent of that request. But I would point to one aspect in particular because my colleague Anne intervened from the Joint Research Centre, and one of the things that we were asked to do was to gather evidence and to put that evidence at the disposal of member states. And one of the things that we're developing together, of course, with the Joint Research Centre is an atlas of demography, which aspires to be a tool that will be available for us in all sectors, whether we're looking at the implementation of the Green Deal, whether it's the digital transition, whether it's in social and economic measures. So we are putting this very much at the forefront of our work. I mentioned earlier on about education, and I think education linked with communication is extremely important with all of the factors that were mentioned. And Jelena was talking about representation at all levels and women's participation. And I think that this is really something that we need to try to do more about, because first of all, there are women candidates, and many of these candidates are overcoming the prejudices that Jelena mentioned. But there is also a reality, which is that if there are less women in elected positions, it is also because women are not voting for women. Now, this may be a difficult issue to put on the table, but the numbers bear this out. And I think that we need to address this. Of course, we need to encourage men to vote for women as well, and create a situation where gender is not, people need to be gender blind when casting their vote. But clearly, we're still in a situation where we need to put mechanisms in place to address the disparities. There was the points that were raised by Anne Drieskens, which I think are extremely important, and I think that we need to look at many of these factors in very closely from the policy perspective. But I would like to make one point in particular, and that is when we do tend to look at women in the context of family, while we don't do the same for men. So we need to also overcome this, that family is not only a perspective which should be supported or boosted in the context of women, but needs to be addressed across the board, and again in a gender blind manner. There was a reference to diversity and also to migrant women. One of the things that we're looking to propose in our long-term vision for rural areas is a project, an approach, which will make rural areas more welcoming for migrants. As well, and I think that in fact there is evidence which shows that there is a tendency for rural communities perhaps to be a little less, to be a bit apprehensive at first, but in the longer term they do tend to be communities that are more welcoming for migrants who are new arrivals to Europe, and that's something that we want to boost. One last point. Talking about the different aspects of policymaking, I think we need to be to bear in mind that it needs, I said this before, to be comprehensive. So we need to look at housing policies. We need to look at taxation. We need to look at red tape, and mainstream the gender angle in all of these. But somebody mentioned that the state needs to be more present. I think that it's very important that the private sector is also very, very present, because what we need to do, we as sort of state or quasi-state entities need to create a playing field. But then it is the private sector that is the one that's going to unleash innovation, that's going to unleash the actual activity that's going to stimulate both the economic growth and the well-being. We need to find the balance between the two. It's very important that there is two. And one of the best examples we have is the concept of smart villages or smart communities, where governments or the state entities need to create the connectivity, but then it's the private sector that's going to take advantage of that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. No, it's really important. The private sector and all these facets, NGOs as well as the economy, associations, whoever. Yeah, that's really important point. Who would like to take the floor next? Alana, would you like?
Sure. Thank you, Andreas. I think it's been a fascinating discussion. Difficult to react to all the incredible points that have been raised. I guess one key takeaway is really that there is no magic bullet, no one size fits all, but we do need these comprehensive approaches and solutions that touch on a whole range of dimensions, the economic policies, the social policies, the family policies, and even more important as we're talking in the context of rural areas. I think another important point that came out strongly, I mentioned it myself, but I heard it several times from many of the experts, is the role of social norms and how crucial it is to tackle those harmful gender roles and stereotypes that keep holding women back, especially in rural areas, but also holding them back from participation in public life and in politics. As Colin, and I'm sorry to use your first name, I see we've dropped the last name, so I mentioned as the great point that Colin just made on women not voting for women. That is just part of the social norms and the gender stereotypes that we continue to see that we really need to tackle. I also like the point that you've just made, Colin, on women always being linked to the family, whereas men are not. And that's another area that we really need to prioritize. And I think many of us are doing that with the gender responsive family policy work that's ongoing. The point about resilience and diversity going together, I think that's a really key point for us to take forward. I do want to mention again that UNFPA has set up a demographic resilience program to support countries in finding solutions to demographic change. And we're helping strengthen human capital, expand choices and opportunities with a strong commitment to gender equality. We're implementing this program, in fact, with many of you here. Many of the technical experts are part of our, what we call the IAPPD, the International Advisory Panel on Population and Development. And we do think that if we get it right, for example, the work that we're doing in Serbia and elsewhere right now, it's all about finding that right policy mix. And we're hoping that with the work that we're doing with all of you, we will be able to contribute to the local context, the municipalities being able to manage their demographic challenges, including at the rural level. Let me stop there for now, and I'm sure we'll continue the debate here. Thank you.
Leo, would you also, from the research perspective, give some insights?
Yeah, sure. Lots of very interesting points raised. I think we to a large extent agree on the direction that we should go. I just point at a few things for some broader perspective. First, young women leaving the rural areas for education. You could see it as a problem, but at the same time, it is part of a movement, a long-term movement, urbanization. Development and urbanization go together. So now we see females getting their chances and the opportunity to study. And they do this in large numbers. Universities most students at universities are women in many countries now. That's a very good thing. The downside of it is that where they leave, well, okay, there is a shortage of women. I mean, that is, but in itself, it is something we should not prevent. You can't say stay where you are, because that would prevent them for sort of seizing their opportunities. So we have to see that the two coins, they are two coins of the same medal in a sense. So how they can be brought together is by, indeed, it's been said already, connectivity between the two regions. Between urban, it should not be, they should not stand opposite to each other. That's one thing I would like to add. Another thing is what Annemie mentioned, the role of NGOs. We see lots of services disappearing from the countryside, from the rural areas, which is by itself a loss, but it also creates opportunities for entrepreneurial activities, often small size, NGOs is mentioned, but also entrepreneurial activities in a way that maybe was it's sort of innovative. People having a small shop together with a library, or having sort of combinations we have not seen before. We see these sort of things happening in smaller scales in rural regions. I think that should be supported. And something happened here, I don't know. But that should be, that should be supported by local and regional governments much more than it is happening now, because often you see that these developments are hindered by laws, regulations that are at the national level maybe fine, but don't work out there. So we need also tailor-made solutions for that sort of things. Mm-hmm. And my experience is there's a lot of resilience and sort of energy in these local communities. Smart villages have been named, resilient communities. These are the key words, which means somehow that we move to another type of community, of society maybe, which is not driven by economic growth as such. We need a broader vision. That's a long way to go. That also involves cultural norms changing, including norms towards gender equality. That is the long way to go. But I think that's the route we should walk. Yes.
Just pick up one question. Thank you, Leo, for this 2 points, particularly also to say that we need this long-term broader vision of how a society should work in the future, and how we engage also in connect between the local and the regional and the national sector. And here's a question which we got from the floor from Elizabeth Wilkins. Alongside encouraging women's political participation, how can we support people from rural communities to participate in national politics? So it relates somehow also to your last point. How can we do that? How is there are there some options in that regard? How can we do that better than we do it now? Who would like to take the floor?
Yeah,
perhaps I could.
Okay.
No, please go.
Colin? So
okay. I think that we have to do many different things. Encouraging women is also needed to educate them, and I have a lot of experience here in Sweden that we in the parties started to educate women to build their self-confidence to participate. We know from recruitment that if we are recruiting someone for a job and we have 10 requirements, women tend to say, oh, I can't apply that job because I only fulfill 9 of the 10th requirements. Men are more confident. They will say, I fulfill 5 of the 10, but I can learn the rest on the way. And by working together with the political parties, they have the infrastructure to support women in rural areas and smaller, and also quotas that, and we have seen that in the European Council. Since we have quotas, we have female participation from all countries, even the ones that said they didn't have women. So it's the same thing in the different levels of a country. So I think it's important to start there. And there is different programs and so on, but we have to give the support, but also collaborate with the parties, because they have the infrastructure for this development. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the really encouragement also. Colin, you would like to say answer on that question?
I just wanted to add that I think one of the areas we can try to enhance participation is by increasing the opportunities of deliberative democracy. Of course, there is I think representative democracy is extremely important, but this is also another part of the portfolio that we are dealing with, and I think that if we increase participation across the board, then that will reflect also in how people approach representative democracy. So one of the big projects that we have coming up is the Conference on the Future of Europe, which unfortunately has been delayed, partly as a result of the pandemic, partly as a result of other issues, but which we hope very soon can be launched. And our aim during this conference on the future of Europe is really to take deliberation to all levels and to really encourage people at all levels to get involved in devising policy. One very important aspect that we're going to be introducing is that there is a feedback mechanism to let citizens know what it is we plan to do with the ideas that they are coming up with. It doesn't mean that everything is going to become law. We have to manage expectations as well. But on the other hand, it's very important to broaden the base and to broaden the opportunities that citizens have to be part of that democratic process. And elections are not the only place we need to be looking at.
Thanks a lot. This is an important point. We had this year, we had on the German level, we had a similar meeting where we discussed about how we can solve similar issues in Germany. And one strong point was also, if you want to keep young people staying there where they are or coming back, you have to give them more voice. They have to feel more in charge and responsible for their environment. And then the key aspect is, of course, and it was also raised today, is to give them to create new ways of the participation in the processes, so they don't feel somehow taken always aside from other age groups. And the same was true, of course, for female participation in political process. So I can only strongly encourage what you just said. I would like to give now the floor to Eva Meloni from WeGate, because she's also to some extent representing the private sector, meaning employment and economy. Eva?
Thank you, Andreas, and good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure, and I think this conversation is really interesting. I fully agree with almost all the points that you already raised up. Just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Eva Merloni, and I'm the project manager of the WeGate project. That is a European project aims at supporting women in starting or growing their own business. So we are, of course, trying to support and, improve the participation of women in the business sector. And I mean, our main activities deal with training and coaching, and mentorship on specific activities like digital skills, or very specific aspect like also access to finance. That is super important, because I mean, when we talk about women participation and how to improve it, we also should consider that from an economic point of view and from the business sector, that just between 5 and 10% of angel investors are women. That means that also we have just few business projects led by women, because if the investors are not women, they don't have even the vision, or they don't see the needs of women's, right? So, I mean, I think we should improve participation of women in many, many sectors, of course, in the business sector too. But from our experience, what we are really working on is to reinforce the concept of the community. Because I have the feeling that maybe, and in particular in the rural area, there is the feeling of a bit of loneliness of women. So if we could work more on connect those women, so how to create a strong network between them. I mean, when we see that our women that are not confident enough, because the diversity in Europe is a matter of fact. I mean, in Europe, there are women entrepreneurs that are really confident and women entrepreneurs that are not. They don't even perceive themselves as women entrepreneurs while they are, so trying to connect those women could be a really crucial point and a key aspect, because if you see that someone else is doing the same, or is facing the same problem, but is facing it in another way, it can also help you in have a different approach. So maybe the networking on a different level, of course. There can be community-based networking that can also then go broader, right? Like than from the community at a regional level, a national level, and then a European level. Also to improve the lobby activities, to be a community that can have a voice for political issues also. So that's, I think, more or less what I wanted to say.
Thanks a lot. We have still time for a last comment from the floor. John Kennedy Mozzotti, please take the floor.
Oh, thank you very much, Andreas. As I'm the UNFPA representative for Bosnia and Herzegovina and country director for Serbia, North Macedonia, and Kosovo under Security Council 44. And when I listen to this engagement, sometimes I feel lost, because I also having worked in government before. And what happens is that when the policies are formulated, sometimes they even lapse before percolating down to the community, and they never even get to know what these policies that have been formulated by the government are or how they affect them. So what we've done, UNFPA, is that we've tried to cascade those policies down to the community level. So we go deliberately down there so that we can engage the community themselves, because if the point is building human capital, and there are many examples that I could give, but I know that we do not have time. We want to build human capital to ensure that, and we know that women, rural women specifically, have a lot to be able to offer, but they are never afforded that opportunity to be able to participate. They don't have the fighting chance. They are not, the ground is not fair. They are so, patriarchy and all the other things are actually piled against them. So what we've done is we go deliberately to the rural areas where we try to match the capacities of those women or what they could be able to do. And we look at innovative partnerships, especially in the private sector. And we've done that in Bosnia, so that those women either, especially young women, they can either participate as apprenticeship or internships. We want to make sure that also they are given opportunity to work. And companies like Violetta, which has a very good record in engaging women, especially at the rural areas, is one that is also championing this. And then secondly, because of this issue of targeting, younger people, because we want to hit the reset button in terms of having a groundswell of young people, young girls who understand things differently. We are implementing programs such as the Girl Advanced Lab, where the girls themselves in the rural areas are empowered to engage, first to have a voice on issues of education, health, and equality, to be able to engage on what it is that they want. And then when they suggest what it is that they want, we pair them with experts to develop those programs, and those programs are funded and they actually participate. And this, what we've seen is that there's a tremendous interest of young people participating on issues that quite frankly, nobody has ever thought that they could be able to want to participate in. So the thing is, we have to be innovative about partnerships. The old ideas that we've always said, leadership, it will come down. No, it never comes down. Or it takes a long time and it's very frustrating. We have to go directly to the women themselves. We have to go directly to the young people, especially younger people, so that we engage them one woman at a time. I mean, it takes time, but it's the right one, because we've noticed that when you empower that young girl, then actually the whole surrounding villages actually get to notice. So that is something that we need to be able to cultivate and contribute, because not only do they affect the communities they live in, but the schools and other social places where they fraternize. So that is I wanted to contribute. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you very much for your important contribution. I would like to ask the three panelists if they would like to say a last word, and then I would like to try to conclude. Perhaps I give the floor ladies first. Lena first.
Thank you so much, Andreas. Well, I guess I would just conclude by thanking you so much for coordinating this Population Europe together with the European Commission. It's been a real pleasure for UNFPA to co-organize this debate with you. It's been wonderful to hear from this vast network of experts working either from government, from international organizations, civil society, private sector. And I think these are the types of conversations we need to have more often. And really, so working together, we can help support countries manage the huge demographic changes that are happening in our region, which, you know, really are causing a certain amount of anxiety, but which we all believe can be managed and dealt with. And so we will see people more confident about having children, young people able to pursue opportunities at home, women and men being able to reconcile work and family, older people being more active contributors to society, and hopefully much more demographically resilient countries and communities. So thank you all again. Thanks to all the participants, and looking forward to continuing our work together. Thank you, Andreas.
Colin, would you take the floor?
Yes, thanks. I certainly could echo pretty much everything that Alana just said, because I think that even in the work we are trying to do, it's very important that we have access to this kind of conversation where we can listen to this kind of input. I was just reflecting that it's actually almost refreshing that we didn't refer much to COVID-19 during this discussion, which to me suggests that we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It doesn't mean that we're not learning the lessons. I think we all have, and we all will be doing a great deal based on what we've learned from this experience. But I think it's also positive that there will be a world one day where this is not there anymore, and we will need to be able to address things in a broader perspective. I have a feeling that too many of our discussions have been dominated, and rightly so, by this pandemic. But I just wanted to point to that. So once again, thanks to yourselves for organizing it. Thanks to UNFPA, to Alana and all our colleagues, and looking forward to continuing these conversations. And one word of thanks as well to the interpreters who have been accompanying us through this. Yeah. Thank you.
Leo, would you also like to give a final word on that?
Yes, thanks, Andreas. I fully support the words just expressed by my colleagues. I think this is a very important meeting. Lots of ideas, and as a researcher, I think, well, okay, there's lots of opportunities for research. We know, of course, a lot about lots of developments, but we also know a lot not yet. And indeed, many of the things now addressed should be, well, are key areas also for research. And one thing that I learned in the north of the Netherlands, where we have a sort of a successful network of both university, professional university, government and participants, stakeholders in the region, that works out. It exists for 10 years now. It works out very well and brings out also lots of new opportunities for, well, sort of all sorts of things, both sort of implementing them on the ground and for research. So that's something also, connectivity in all sorts of ways is important to create resilient regions, which is, I think, the buzzword to this conversation. And I think the big structural thing is the cultural change that has been addressed lots of times. It is also the most difficult one to change, but I think there were lots of opportunities and lots of ideas expressed to do something about it. It's a long road, but I think it will work out in the end. And and I think really we move towards a sort of a new sort of society where we do things slightly different than in the past. And referring finally to what Colin said about COVID, I was just going to mention that because of COVID and some other developments, we move indeed to some other future where maybe also the regional demography of the future will be slightly different from that of the past. So maybe some of the problems that we now face may not be problems anymore just because of societal developments and such. So in that sense, society is resilient by definition, I would say. So I'm optimistic.
Thanks a lot. I couldn't actually add anything to that, this optimistic view. Let me just refer also a little bit on COVID-19. Today, home office is much more self-understanding. It was much less before the crisis. The many social and economic outcomes of the crisis and of COVID, we have to work hard on because data comes in and we have really a lot of research is done on that and a lot of interaction between policymakers and researchers to understand what's going on. But I would also be a bit more optimistic that there are also some positive developments. Well, it's hard to conclude such a rich and multifaceted meeting which we had today. We started already in the morning with the experts. Now we had the discussions with you, and I can only share what the colleagues just said. There are a lot of good and great ideas, ways to tackle issues like they have mentioned issues of participation and representations, of how we can organize deliberative democracies, also including the local sphere, how we can change role models, even if we don't want to interrupt too much into families, but we want at least to engage males a lot more. The matter of education and human capital, how this interferes into these chances females have. Very strong point also, diversity and resilience, connectivity. So I could add a lot more ideas which we took out from this meeting. And to be frank, I mean, that's the best what you can have from a meeting. We got a lot of new ideas, all of us, I hope. I for myself, at least. A lot of more ideas where we can do more investigation, where we can also encourage more dialogue between policymakers, researchers, and NGOs, and we will certainly do more of that meetings in the future. There will be also a short outcome kind of a paper where we will try to wrap up a few of the points so that you also get something at hand which concludes that. In a topic which has so much diversity and where you cannot hit the magic bullet, or there is no one-size-fits-all solution, you end up always with a little bit of more complex picture, but actually that's really the starting point, as Leo also already pointed out, and also the other speakers. So thanks a lot for this tour d'horizon. I think we got a lot of new impulses from that, more than we could expect in 90 minutes. And of course, we have now to follow up in many different ways. We will certainly follow up as Population Europe. I hope also the other partners will join us, and we can have more of these events in the future, also on certain aspects of these topics. Thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks a lot for sharing your ideas with us. Take care and hope to see you soon in the future. And thanks a lot for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.